Okay, so first thing, what is the acronym for trig functions? SOHCAHTOA. You need to know the acronym, you need to know sine, cosine, tangent. Okay, that is 90% of your test. You need to know your trig functions. The next one's write all three trig ratios. Ratios are fractions for the indicated angle. On your test, it will say write fractions in simplest form. Okay, I don't know why it wasn't on these directions, but you should always reduce a fraction if you can. So if I'm looking at angle A, here's my reference angle. The sine. So let me just go through and label everything. So opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. So angle A, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. If you just give me 24 over 26, you will get it wrong. What number goes into both of those? 2. So your answer should be 12 over 13. No decimals, you are leaving it as a fraction, but it needs to be in simplest form. Again, you can write in pencil if you'd like. I highly recommend you change your answers in colored pen or marker so you know what to study. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And that can also be reduced by 2, so you should have 5 over 13. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. So what, 12 over 5? Okay, those should be your 3 answers there. Here my reference angle is y. So this one's my opposite. This is my adjacent. This is my hypotenuse. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, which reduces to 4/5. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which reduces to 3/5. And tangent is opposite over adjacent, which reduces to 4/3. Okay. So there'll be questions on your test just like this. Make sure you keep it as a ratio because this is where people mess up, and you write it in simplest radical form. Any questions on those first 2? No? Okay. Find the missing side or angle. It is going to have the exact same directions on the test. So you need to know the difference between sides and angles. Okay? If we are dealing with sides, you're going to use your normal trig function, sine, cosine, and tangent. If you are dealing with angles, we are going to use the inverse trig functions. It's important that you also get a calculator tomorrow. So as soon as you walk in, if you don't own a calculator, bring your phone or ID and trade one out, okay? Because you will need one for the test. We're also rounding to the nearest tenth for side lengths and nearest degree for angle measures. What am I solving for in number 1? A side or an angle? A side. This one happens to be the adjacent side that I'm looking for, and I know the hypotenuse. Which trig function uses adjacent and hypotenuse? Cosine. So the cosine of 42 equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Okay. On your test, here's what I'm looking for. You need to write out your original proportion. The second step is what you are plugging into your calculator. So what I'm plugging into my calculator is 14 times the cosine of 42 because we cross multiply. So I need this step, I need this step. Final answer is what I also need. So the cosine, 14 times the cosine of 42 is 10.4. So if you want full credit on your test, you will have all 3 of these steps written out. What do you mean, do you need x in the equation? I mean, it should be x equals. Am I going to mark it wrong? Probably not, but it should say x equals, okay? So again, all 3, your initial, what's going into your calculator, and your answer. These questions will be worth 3 points. 1, 2, 3 points, okay? And as always, the more work you show me, even if your answer's wrong, the more partial points you can get. Number 5, I'm also solving for a side length. Here I have the opposite and the hypotenuse, which is sine. So the sine of 74 equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. What happens when the variable's on the bottom? Flip and divide. Flip and divide. So 16 divided by the sine of 70, oh, that is not right. 16 divided by the sine of 74 is 16.6. Make sure you are rounding appropriately as well. Number 6, what am I solving for? An angle. I'm looking for this question mark. I'm going to replace it with an X. So I have the adjacent and the hypotenuse, which is cosine. So the cosine of X equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Because I am looking for an angle, I'm going to use my inverse trig function. So the inverse cosine of 12 over 31, when I plug that into my calculator, inverse cosine of 12 divided by 31. Because it's an angle, we're rounding to the nearest degree. So I'm getting 67 degrees. We still okay? Yes. Okay. Number 7, side, which is the opposite and the hypotenuse. So this is sine. Is that a 48? So the sine of 48 equals x over 17. Here I multiply, so 17 times the sine of 48 equals x. And I am getting 12.6. Here we have an angle with the opposite and the hypotenuse. So sine again, sine of x equals 36 over 43. We take the inverse sine of 36 over 43. Inverse sine of 36 divided by 43. You should have 57 degrees because it rounds. If you don't do one on the test. Yes, because the directions tell you round all sides to the 10th and all angles to the nearest degree. So if you do not round properly, you will lose points. Will you get it completely wrong? No, but you will lose points. Yeah.
For number 7, I did it differently, but my mom I think it's called law of sine, I think. So it's more work, but I think that's for me just easier to do. So if I have that, but I still get the same answer, is that okay?
You did law of sine, so what's your equation?
It would be sine, it would be 17 sin over 48. It's like the same thing. 17 sin over 48 divided by 690.
You can show it to me, but that only works for sine, though.
Because for number 4 it worked too.
For cosine? Okay, come show me afterwards. Okay, number 9. Here we have the opposite and the adjacent. Opposite and adjacent is tangent. So the tangent of x equals the opposite over the adjacent. X equals the inverse tangent of 2 over 4. Someone asked me yesterday if they can reduce this fraction. Absolutely. If you want to, you can. So if you're in your calculator, you want to plug in the inverse tangent of 1/2, it's the same thing as 2 over 4. Do you need to do that? No. Okay, because you're just using your calculator. So the inverse tangent of 2 over 4 is 27 degrees. Yes, so I rounded to the nearest 10th. Okay, so one more time. If you are solving for a side, you round to the nearest tenth. If you are solving for an angle, you round to the nearest whole number. Okay? Any questions through number 9? All right. 10 and 11. They are the exact same things you just did. You just have to do more than one in the problem. Okay? So what do we want to solve for first? You can choose however we want to do this. Y. Okay. So y is an angle. Now, because I already know the other two angles, finding that third angle is easy. Okay, triangle sum theorem says that all angles in a triangle equal 180 degrees. Okay, so 90 plus 52, whatever that is, minus 180 will give me y. Or, since this one's 90 degrees, these other two have to be 90 degrees. So 90 minus 52 is 38 degrees, which is y. So that one, there's no work to show. You can plug that into your calculator. Okay, so I solved for y. Now let's solve for x. I am going to use 52 as my reference angle. If you choose to use 38 as your reference angle, that's okay. You are going to get the same answer. Okay, so if I want to solve for x, which is the adjacent, what other side am I going to need to use? The hypotenuse, right? Because that's the side that I have. So adjacent and hypotenuse is what trig function? Cosine. So the cosine of 52 equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. This is where I multiply. So 14 cosine of 52 equals x. And I get 8.6. Again, now here's the work I need to show. Now I need to solve for z. We have a couple options. First option is to continue to use our trig functions. Pick a reference angle, pick the side you want to use, and do exactly what we just did. Does anyone know what a second option would be? Pythagorean theorem. Okay, because you have two sides of a right triangle, you can find the third side by using the Pythagorean theorem. You don't have to do it that way. You can use trig functions, but that is a second option. I'm going to stick with trig functions because I think it's quicker, but Pythagorean theorem is an option. So I want to solve for z, and I'm still going to use 52 as my reference angle. So now that's the opposite. What side should I use with that? I would use the hypotenuse because you know it's 14. You can use the adjacent, but we rounded, so your answer may be slightly different, which is why your work is going to be important. If you use the Pythagorean theorem, your work is going to be important. Okay? So, opposite and hypotenuse is sine. So the sine of 52 equals the opposite over the hypotenuse, or 14 sine of 52 equals z. And I get 11.0. Did you get that? Awesome. Okay, number 11. What do you want to solve for first? X? Okay. So x is an angle. In order for me to solve for that angle, I need two sides, and I happen to have the opposite side and the hypotenuse, which is sine. So the sine of x equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. I'm going to take the inverse sine, plug it into my calculator, and I get 15 point, nope, we're doing an angle, so 15 degrees. Yes? Okay. I can solve for y pretty easily now, right? 90 minus 15 is 75. How can we solve for z? Use y, okay. Or you can use the Pythagorean theorem, either one. So if I use y and I need z, that happens to be the opposite side. And which side would you like to use, the 8 or the 30?
8.
The 8, okay, so that's the adjacent. So this is tangent. So the tangent of 75 equals the opposite over the adjacent. Now yours may be different, but you should get the same answer. 8 times the tangent of 75, I am getting 29.9. Okay, yeah.
I got 16 facts. I think I got 15.5 in my calculus.
Okay, so let me look at, maybe I didn't round, let me see. Okay, hold on. Shh. The inverse sine of 8 divided by 30, I have 15.46. So since I'm rounding, can you see that? Okay. So since I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, all I have to do is look at this 4. Does that 4 round the 15 up? No. Okay, so you don't keep going and round up and round up. Just look at the next number after what you need to round to round. Okay? Are we okay with those numbers then? Yeah? Okay, here's where we have been struggling. I repeat, I am not giving you the special right triangles tomorrow. You need to know them. So, I want you to take a second on your paper, and I want you to draw 2 right triangles, and I want you to label one 45, 45, 90, and I want you to label the other one 30, 60, 90, and without talking to the person next to you, I want you to fill in those sides real quick. Can you fill in those sides? Make sure you read these directions too. Find the missing links. Answers must be in radical form, which means you have to use special right triangles. If you give me a decimal, I will give you a 0. Okay? Follow the directions. So, 45, 45, 90 is the easiest one to remember because the sides across from the 45 degrees are the same. And then all you have to remember is the hypotenuse. Okay? 30, 60, 90 takes a little bit more. Across from 30 is S. Across from 60 is S radical 3. Across from 90 is 2S. Okay, did we get that? If you don't know this, you need to memorize this tonight. And then as soon as you get your test tomorrow, you need to write it at the top of your test. Even if that's not the first question that's being asked. Write these 2 triangles down so you don't forget them because you are not going to be given them. Okay? All right. Now, you need to label. There's not a whole lot of work for these, which means you need to label the sides. If you just give me answers, you will not get credit for that. Okay, so here is your work. Across from 30 is S. Across from 60 is S radical 3. Across from 90 is 2S. Okay, that was step 1, which means that's what you need to show me. Step 2 was to solve for S. Where can I solve for S? Here, right? And how do I get S by itself? Divide by 2. S equals 6. It will probably be beneficial for you to show me what S is, because just in case you get these wrong, I can still give you points for getting S. Well, if S is 6, Y is 6. If S is 6, X is 6 radical 3. If you just write these answers, you will lose points. I need to see your sides labeled. Okay? Next one, we have S, S radical 3, 2S. Here's where I can solve for s again, and s is going to equal 4, which means y is 4 and x is 4 radical 3. Yes?
On the test, are these problems going to be like this, or it's just weird this whole first
Where you just saw, what do you mean?
Is this how the test is going?
So you just have to solve for the two side lengths. Okay, number 14, I have a different triangle. So across from 45 is s, across from 45 is s, across from x is s radical 2. I already know what s is, which means I already know what y is. 8 radical 3 over 3. But I'm going to take that and plug it in here. So 8 radical 3 over 3 times radical 2 is 8 radical 6 over 3. Next one, s radical 2. Okay, here's where I can solve. How do I get s by itself? Divide by the square root of 2, which means s equals 4, which means y equals 4 and x equals 4. If you know your triangle, these shouldn't be that bad. All right, let's see. Across from 60 is s radical 3. Here's s. Here's 2s. So s equals 3, which means u equals 6 and v equals 6 radical 3. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. 3 radical 3. I was using this 6, sorry. Okay, so that was my bad. So I plugged 3 in here. 2 times 3 was 6. And then I needed to plug 3 in, not 6. I don't know what I was doing. All right, last one of these. S radical 2. If I divide by radical 2, I get s equals 5, which means x equals 5 and y equals 5. You will notice there's not a whole lot of work in this section, but the work that I am putting on my paper is the work that should be on your paper. Any questions on special right triangles? Okay, word problems. It's going to look exactly like this tomorrow. You have to draw the triangle. Now, you should know that automatically, before you even start reading, you're going to have a right triangle. You don't have to read anything to know that. Okay, so an ant is looking up at you. Okay, so here you are. And here's the little ant. Thank you, Karina. So an ant is looking up at you with an angle of elevation of 24 degrees. You are 5 feet tall. How far is the ant from your foot? Here's your foot. Here's the ant. Here's the distance you're looking for. Okay. What sides do I have? The opposite, and I heard it. The adjacent, so that's tangent of 24 equals the opposite over the adjacent. We're going to flip and divide. And I'm pretty sure your test tomorrow says round to the nearest tenth. If it doesn't, just do so. And I am getting x equals 11.2 feet. Some of you on the last test for the word problem did not write your units and you lost a point. Okay, you need the units. We have a word problem with units. You need units in your answer. This one was good. Ready? Okay, so Bob is looking at a helicopter. Well, a helicopter is flying. So here's my helicopter. That's kind of what it looks like. My helicopters and planes are identical. And here's Bob. Okay, so Bob is looking at a helicopter that is flying 1,000 feet above the ground. Bob is 1,500 feet from the helicopter. What is the angle of elevation Bob is looking at the helicopter?
Will the angle of elevation always be about lowering?
You got that? Okay, so this is the opposite and the hypotenuse. So sine of x equals opposite over hypotenuse. So I'm going to take the inverse sine of that. And I am getting 42 degrees. Yes? Okay. Next triangle. So you have a building. Okay, building stands straight up. So here's your building. These are, I don't know what that is, but there's your building. A building 50 feet high. This was my favorite question for people yesterday. Cast a shadow. If you are outside, where is your shadow? On the ground. A lot of people were like, gave me like the hand motion of the hypotenuse. If you're outside, do you ever see your shadow floating in the air? It does not float in the air. It is on the ground. Okay, shadows are on the ground. And the shadow of the building is 50 or 68 feet long. Find the angle of elevation. Okay, so this one's tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. And if I plug that in, I get 36 degrees. Yes? Okay. A dog chased a cat up a tree. The cat is 14 feet up the tree. If the dog is standing 3 feet from the tree, so here's, okay, I can't draw cats and dogs. That looks like a mouse. It's good. I told you guys I couldn't draw. Yes, I painted all of those. It's totally different. Because it's different. It is not the same thing. Okay. So the cat is 14 feet up the tree. The dog is standing 3 feet from the tree. What is the distance from the cat to the dog? So I am looking for this distance here. We have a couple options. What would be what was the first thing you thought of doing? Oh, you all thought of that right away? Okay. If you have two side lengths of a right triangle and you're looking for the third side length, you can use the Pythagorean theorem. That is option 1, and since that's what we said first, that's what I'll do. Second option would be to find one of these angles using trig and then use trig again to find the side length. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. Your rounding may be slightly different, so it may be slightly off, but if you show your work, that's okay. I'm going to use Pythagorean theorem because that's what everyone said they thought of first, which I know is a lie. Okay, so here's A, B, and C. Oh my goodness. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. 14 squared is 196. Plus 9 equals C squared. So 205 equals 196. And because it can be in decimals, that's fine. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, we can only have positive values, so you should have C equals 14.3 feet. If you did trig functions, was it the exact same?
Yeah.
Okay.
14.4.
Okay. So your rounding may be slightly different, which is why your work is important. Yeah. C is always the hypotenuse. Yep. Okay. Shh. So, from the top of a tower, the angle of depression. Remember, your angle of depression is here. But your angle of depression is congruent to your angle of elevation. So your angle of depression and elevation are both 74 degrees. And then here's a tower. It's the same thing. Okay. And there's a flower on the ground. The top of the tower is 90 feet above the ground. How far is the flower from the foot of the tower? What trig function are you going to use? Tangent, because you have the opposite and the adjacent. So the tangent of 74 equals the opposite over the adjacent. We're going to flip and divide. And we get x equals 25.8 feet. Yes, Karina.
Is the angle
Okay.
of depression always
Hold
the
on,
top?
hold on.
Angle of depression always the top, like, angle?
The angle of depression is always this angle here. So if you extend out, it's what you're looking down at. Because if you're standing at the top of the tower, you're not looking straight down. You're looking down this way at something. Okay, so this is the angle of depression. So it's not the one inside the triangle, it's the one on the outside.
And they're always congruent.
And it's always congruent to the angle of elevation. Because these two lines are parallel, and what kind of angles are these? If you have two parallel lines, here would be a transversal. What type of angles are these? Alternate interior angles, which is why they're congruent. A fireman's ladder. This is the ladder. Is leaning against a house. That makes a 50-degree angle with the ground. How long is the ladder if the ladder is 8 feet from the foot of the house? Okay, here's your ladder. It's 8 feet from the foot of the house. So I'm using cosine. Cosine of 50 equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Flip and divide. I am getting 12.4 feet. Did we get that? Okay, hold on. Shh. You need to know where a ramp is. How or where is a ramp?
Hypotenuse.
This is your ramp. Remember, you cannot go up a ramp if it doesn't have an incline. Then it's not a ramp, it's the ground. This is the ground. And some of you are not listening, and some of you are going to get this wrong tomorrow. The ground is on the floor. It's what you walk on. The ramp is at a slant. It's what you push something up. We understand that? Okay.